I offered it to a lot of people my age when I was young too. And it's like, you're young, go for it. Whatever it is that is calling your name that seems scary, there's so many resources now, just go for it because again, you're young, you have plenty of time to fall back on an alternative career or change your path. And nobody wants to live a life of regret. So go for it while you can.
Welcome to this week's As Unexpected podcast, when we talk to C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, and philanthropists about how they lead into the future when the future generally goes as unexpected. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and my own professional experience has made me a believer that it's not how you show up when all goes as planned, but it is how you show up when things go as unplanned. Given all of their experiences, each of our guests has become very attuned to the fact that the future is not to be predicted. My hope is that this podcast can help all of you become better leaders by building the core leadership capabilities for leading in an uncertain world. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of As Unexpected. I'm Scott Marshall, your host, and today we get to talk to an executive chef for a Michelin starred restaurant. Now, I don't want to do all the references to that popular show that talks about someone running a restaurant as an executive chef, because I think TV and life are drastically different. But this particular chef is going to give us a great sense of what it's like to work and split themselves into so many different pieces and run so much at such a high level. Rachel, thank you for joining. Thrilled to have you on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It's exciting. It's nice to bring semester at sea back to my life a little bit.
Indeed. Well, it's great to have you back in the fold, and I'm so excited to hear about what it's like to work in your role. You and I were talking earlier. I reread your bio, and I thought, how does someone accomplish this? And I think what's going to be interesting for our listeners is to learn how someone gets into a role like this. So, if you don't mind just starting off, do you mind explaining sort of your background and what got you into this role as an executive chef, and what this role really means in day-to-day as an executive chef?
Yeah, so I'm from California, Southern California, and I grew up on a citrus orchard. So food, plants was always in my life. And, naturally you're growing stuff, you need to figure out how to utilize it. So that was something that was part of my childhood. When as I grew older, I clearly had a passion for food. And actually my semester at sea friends used to joke that I ate my way around the world. So I definitely did. Thank God I was younger then and I could actually do that without growing 4 sizes like I would now. But, obviously I was in college at that stage and thought I would go off and get a degree in law, but I had this nagging passion that I couldn't really let go. And I felt like if I didn't pursue it and give it a chance, then I would just regret it the rest of my life. So I went for it and ended up working in some really cool restaurants, a lot of them Michelin, and thought I would never work in a hotel. Naturally, I found myself working in hotels because you can never say never. And through working hotels, I was doing a series of wine dinners and kind of loved that pairing and that whole experience and wanted to get back to a more rural life. And I was working in Orange County, which, is south of LA, and discovered Justin Winery, which for those of you that don't know, is in the central coast of California, smack dab between LA and San Francisco. And a chef position opened up and they had a restaurant on site already built and a culinary program. So it was a blending of my hotel and restaurant world and back into a more rural environment. So that's how I ended up here.
That's amazing. And your current role, I've obviously given some intro on it, but could you give our listeners a bit more explanation of what it means to be an executive chef in this environment?
Yeah. So, gosh, Basically, I'm the executive chef and the culinary director. So we have two tasting rooms within Justin, and we have a pastry program. So we make homemade chocolates, truffles that get paired with wine and they get sold on e-commerce, as well as we have a lunch program for our tasting room that's a la carte casual food. And then we have a fine dining Michelin Star program for dinner. And recently we've acquired another winery, Lewis in Napa, and we are opening that property in about a month and a half. So I'll be opening and overseeing the culinary program affiliated with that tasting room as well.
My goodness, that does sound
Yeah.
like a lot. You do catering as well.
We do catering. So as you can imagine, it's quite beautiful here. There's a lot of vineyards and rolling hills, and we're so close to the coast. You can see that marine layer washing, and it's gorgeous. So ideal place for weddings and corporate events. And so we do catering. So bringing my hotel world into the restaurant world. It's kind of all blending together here.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, I have mentioned to you before in messaging, and I'll say it here, I've got to get there. I do get to LA and I do get to San Francisco, but someday I'm going to have to get right there to Justin and meet you in person and get a sense of this.
You know, as a California girl, I never really stopped here either. But one day when you drive the coast, which is an amazing trip, you know, you'll have an excuse and an easy way to just stop right here. And it's gorgeous. And then you'll come back after that.
For sure, for sure. Well, I am guessing in your life currently, the as unexpected is absolutely what's expected. That you make a lot of plans, and yet you got to be able to respond in a moment to things that just don't go as planned. Do you have a couple of stories that you could share about how things went as unexpected and how you showed up? Importantly, how you showed up for yourself in those moments and how you showed up for those around you. Lessons learned as you grew into this leadership.
Oh gosh, there's so many big and small. And I mean, not to dwell on COVID, but COVID kind of flipped the whole entire restaurant and winery business upside down. And
Yeah.
couple that with reopening, and then we had fires. So you couldn't be inside, but you couldn't be outside, but you still had a business to run and you still had employees that you needed to, you know, keep employed, and you had guests that you needed to host. So I mean, that was kind of literally a wild time trying to balance all of the rules and regulations and still do that on top of, you know, culturally everything changed as well. And I think for all of us, but especially during that time, to your point, I really learned that, you know, you can't plan anything. All you can do is try to make yourself as flexible as possible and know that everything is going to go wrong. And if I think that everything is going to go wrong, then that bar is pretty low for me and I can just try to pivot. And it sounds maybe a pessimist way to look at it, but that's really just it. And I feel like even since then, the operation that I run and when I train people and onboard them, it's still the messaging is we're always changing and evolving. So you have to be flexible and you really need to have a plan A, which is, you know, your goal in the perfect world. And then we need to plan for the unexpected, which is difficult because you don't know what you're planning for. But as long as you can be flexible and have like a plan B and a C, then maybe, you know, you'll be on the right path. But again, it's really just that trying to keep an open mind and positivity about it and not beat yourself up.
Yeah, I can imagine that. Just the fact that you said you can't have them inside and you can't have them outside,
Right.
and you're still going to serve them some food and pour some wine for them. So today, obviously, you're not in the midst of fires. We're not in the midst of COVID. You're expanding your operation. You must be expanding your team. How do you work to establish that mindset in those that report directly to you and probably are running their own teams? This mindset of we have a goal, we set high standards, and we're always ready to adapt. How do you work that in? Not everybody's had your experience.
So I try to teach people at every level one guiding principle, which is just to work with integrity And when in doubt, just do what's right, because there's so many unexpected moments within, a service or within a week or our business that, to your point, if you don't know what's going to happen, how do you coach them through it? So I try to always tell my employees, you have to hold yourself to that standard, and whatever that highest level is of integrity. If you make a practice of working that way, whether it's the way that you're cooking your food to the way that you're treating your neighbor, all of it. If that's your guiding principle, then when you falter, at least you're faltering still at a high level. And I can't fault somebody if their path was to do what's right or work with a high level integrity. Then theoretically, they're going to get close to where they need to be.
That you explained it in such a calm, like almost of course manner. And yet I think it has such power in its simplicity, that is, show up with integrity. And yeah,
It
can you give
seems
an
a lot
example?
easier, right? But
Yeah, yeah.
and I think in a very simplistic way in the kitchen, when it's extremely busy and you've got a guest, you don't want them to wait and you want to get that food out perfectly. And you mentioned the stress that is portrayed in TV shows and the screaming and the intensity, and there is a level of truth to that. And so, when a person gives you the product and it's not right, and I have to send it back. And then there's that level of integrity, right? Did you prep it wrong or did you cook it wrong? And you need to self-correct, right? Otherwise, when it gets to me, I'm going to push it back to you. And that level of self-accountability and teaching that and holding them to that standard, it eventually sets a pattern. And again, it carries through their behavior in general. And it's hard for an individual. It's also hard for me because I have to, correct, and it's a level of controversy, right? It's not always patting everyone on the back saying good job. Holding people accountable is not always fun.
Yeah, you've probably heard this saying. It's very simple, and it's, I'm here to earn your respect, not your friendship.
Yeah.
like, like I will care for you. I will support you. I will be humane, and ultimately, I have to hold you accountable. This is about a really high functioning, well functioning team delivering a great product, and we have to do that work. How do you balance that with, these are humans? I have to show that I care about them. Uh, I have to show that I want them showing up tomorrow with
Right.
the energy and vitality tomorrow, not just today. So how do you balance that in your role that is so high pressure?
Honestly, it's an ongoing struggle. I would be lying if I said I had it all figured out. But you know, obviously praise is needed, and I think hiring people that are passionate, this isn't the kind of job you do just because it looked cool, right, and it sounded fun. You really have to have a passion for it, because not every day is a good day. And like any job, right, if you love it, then the bad is not as bad. That being said, when they're passionate and the team holds each other accountable and they hold their self to that standard, and we're all trying to achieve the same goal, it makes it easier, because again, in a team environment, you don't want to be the one letting down your teammate. And I think one thing in restaurants that's a challenge is you have a back of the house and the front of the house, meaning you have a kitchen staff and you have servers, and they're often two different teams. So I try to bring those two teams together and realize how they impact one another, because otherwise they don't necessarily feel each other's pain. And that, I think, was a big takeaway for me in COVID, when I had to wear a bunch of hats, and you really learn what it's like to be on the front of the house side. So I try to really bridge those gaps.
There's so much in what you just said. So I'm going to go back to one thing, which is, I'm paraphrasing. If you have a passion for something, then the bad isn't as bad and the good can be great.
Yeah. So
Is that a fair characterization of what you're
I
saying?
think so. Yeah. And you're exactly right. So those tough days, you know, that they're going to happen, you move through them, but when you have a good day, I mean, nothing feels better, right? And there's things that we do for the guest that are extremely difficult for us. And, in the moment, we're kicking ourselves and asking ourselves, do we really want to do this? But when the guest, is in tears and telling you how they appreciate what you did so much, then it's like, okay, guys, it was worth it. We're going to keep doing this. But, having those guest interactions and those reminders, and again, I think, you're creating those genuine moments for people. And that's why we're in hospitality. We want to make people happy. Essentially, it's not just our passion about creating good food, it's how that translates to our guest.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program for college students and adults on career breaks, sabbaticals, or retired, interested in learning and exploring the world together. Learn more about the Lifelong Learner program at www.semesteratSea.org. Yeah. And building off the second piece that I captured from what you said is living into your leadership capacity. You are attentive to the pressures that each team is feeling uniquely, and attempt to make sure that each team then also understands the pressures that the other teams are feeling, so that they can become almost more sympathetic to the other and work
Right.
better together. Is that a fair characterization as well?
Yeah. Yes, it is. And I'm trying. I don't know if I've achieved it, to be perfectly honest, but I keep trying, because naturally they cross paths and they feel each other, and there's a level of tension or seamless harmony depending on the day. And so when we do our team meetings, again, it can be harsh to point out as individual in service where it went wrong, but it's an example to everyone. This is what we need to avoid. And, we all felt that at a different point, and here's what we can do to change it, right? As an individual, you need to improve here, but as a team, we can recognize that and jump into. So then again, it's a balancing act of the individual holding themselves accountable, and then us as a team or the leaders jumping in at the right moment. And again, that's a fine line too. When you're holding your team accountable, are you setting them up for success, or are you enabling them, right? Are you training them? Or, it's just like a parent too, right? When do you pull back?
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. And the truth is, any business organization should follow these very same principles. So that's why I try to pull it out. First of all, for any young adult, particularly, please recall what Rachel said very early on. She had a nagging passion. She decided not to ignore it, and she embraced it. And now, because of her living into that passion, bad days aren't as bad as they could be, and good days are great. Uh, and then the second piece, this very practical thing. First of all, your humility around I'm always learning. That's spot on. How do you really hold people accountable? How do you recognize pressures on individual teams, and how do you find ways that they can really work well together? That conveys to any organization,
Right.
right?
It does.
It certainly conveys to my organization. How do we recognize that the organization I work for is actually one team, but within it there's departments and they each have their own accountability?
Yeah. And that can be difficult too, right? Because within different departments of an organization, they're working in a completely different format and different function. And that's the other thing I try to tell my team. You can't you need to not pass judgment or assume that you understand what's going on in that other team, because you'll just eat yourself alive, right? and and I think that, again, any industry, any position, any human, you naturally are going to compare yourself to the other team or the other person, personally or professionally. And that's just something that mentally none of us need to go down that mind trap. It's just a bad headspace.
Yeah, boy, you're spot on. I actually have on my drive a diagram that points out this concept of the ladder of inference. And we don't need to go into the details, but at the bottom of the ladder on the ground are all the objective facts. The true reality that if we all come down off our ladders and we look at all the facts, we're going to be so much better. But what we oftentimes do is we live at the top of the ladder, which is our own subjective reality, where we make all kinds of assumptions.
Right.
And so how do we bring our teams? Okay, come on, let's move down. Let's stand on the ground and let's really make an assessment of what's going on here.
And it goes back to what I said earlier when I tell my team, if you just work with the guiding principle of integrity and to do what's right, even if it takes time, everything will fall into place. But you just have to be patient and just focus on what you're doing.
Okay, this is a great transition point, actually, for me to read this quote to you from the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Now, you and I talked before we began the podcast that it's a bit of a convoluted quote, but if we really go into it and interpret it, I think it really applies to our living lives for sure. So the quote goes like this: because we tend to be nice to other people when they please us and nasty when they do not, we are statistically punished for being nice and rewarded for being nasty. Now, again, are there words missing? No. Is there context missing? Probably. But this quote really goes to the fact that if we're really nice, we start to set these expectations that are higher, and it's harder to please, and we get punished because we're not meeting these expectations as they continue to be elevated. And if we set expectations low and we're not nice, then even if we're a little bit nicer, then we're rewarded for it. It's, again, sort of a difficult quote, but there's actually some real power in what's being said here. And I wonder if it applies to your world at all.
Yeah, just hearing you interpret it, resonates with me on multiple different levels, both with our lunch program and our dinner program, which are totally different. And, when you talk about unexpected also, Michelin didn't used to be here in the Central Coast. So that also was unexpected in my career. I didn't come to this tiny little town trying to get a Michelin star. They didn't exist here. I just came to cook good food in a great environment. But again, that level of working with integrity brought Michelin, gave us all these awards and accolades, which is obviously very exciting and wonderful to be recognized. But to your point, there comes expectations with that. And those expectations aren't just on me. Those expectations are to all of us in hospitality, because even if you're not coming to the restaurant, but you're eating or experiencing a different program here on site, there's this sort of assumption or parallel that you're going to have, a higher level experience. So that expectation, to your point, how do you got to keep chasing and trying to deliver, and where is that value proposition? So yeah. And also to that point, we have a very expensive hamburger. So when at our lunch program, when you keep adding on the bacon and the egg, and pretty soon you've got this $57 hamburger. And exactly, right, I won't even let my husband order it. But and I have to tell the cooks, right, you have a guest that's spending a huge sum of money. We can't disappoint, because the expectation now is so high. How do you make it perfect every single time? But then, the service needs to be just as genuine or hospitable to carry through on that value, that dollar. And are we delivering? So yeah, it hits everybody.
Yeah. A $57 hamburger must be extraordinary.
I know. It's kind of embarrassing. I can't even believe I admitted. But if you go and you look on the website, you can see it for yourself, anyways. And and it's still our top seller at lunch. So
Yeah, there you go. Because
yeah,
you keep meeting expectations.
right.
You're leading with integrity. Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
I
I'm
think it
not
did.
sure.
I think it
Okay.
did. And how do you just, again, hold people accountable and support them as humans amidst this high expectation environment where people are paying a lot for their experience that includes food. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And in some ways, we're not selling $57 hamburgers on our voyages, but it is a fairly high value proposition, higher cost experience, and expectations are pretty high. So when our air conditioning isn't working on the ship, people are upset. It's hot, it's uncomfortable, and of course the ship's in the Indian Ocean, and I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado, and I wouldn't know how to fix an HVAC if I was on the ship. So, how do we manage those expectations? How do we address the issue? How do we get people back realizing the value of the experience while holding people accountable? So, I actually can understand your world fairly well, um, even though we're operating very different businesses.
Yeah, and to your point, the lessons and the objectives that we talked about, they carry through in everybody's business, no matter what you're doing. And I realize that in you speaking, one of the things, well, we live in like a little country town, so we don't have a lot of cooks or servers with, experience from the major cities. So we're teaching people and training them, which goes back to hiring people with a level of passion. But as a leader, also that comes back to what do I need to give that person to be successful? Because I'm going to hold them to a really high standard. And if for everybody it's different, right? So trying to figure out what those tools and resources are to lift them up and then train them, and then, again, at what point do you take the training wheels off and stop enabling, right? It's a fine balance with everybody, and it's different,
Yeah,
which means we really have to be able to connect and understand the people that we're working with, as well as our guests for the front of the house. They really, one thing I'm really proud of with our front of the house is their ability to connect with the guest in a genuine way and not be pretentious or cold. And, you can't teach that with people. You can really just hire the personality and then train the technique and, kind of hope it all comes together. But again, when their guiding principle is work with integrity and we want the guests to leave happy. So what do we need to do in all of our relative positions to achieve that?
yeah. Rachel, we're about finished, but there's just so much that I hope our listeners are capturing here. Really follow your passion. It makes your days tolerable when things aren't going well, and they make it brilliant when things are going well. Understand the teams and the pressures on the teams, and make sure those teams understand each other. Operate with integrity. Holding that line gets your organization through difficult times, and then, just as you said, hire and nurture the right people for the business you're in. There, those principles apply no matter what the industry is. It's awesome. We're about to finish here. If there's any last core piece of advice you want to share let's focus on young adults right now, thinking about what's next in my life. What am I going to pursue? What would it be? What would be that piece of advice you'd offer?
Um, I offered it to a lot of people my age when I was young too. And it's like, you're young, go for it. Whatever it is that is calling your name that seems scary, um, you know, there's so many resources now. Just go for it because, again, you're young. You have plenty of time to fall back on an alternative career or change your path. And nobody wants to live a life of regret. So go for it while you can.
That's a perfect ending. Love it. Love it. Rachel, this has been awesome. I'm going to get down to that small town and that beautiful place at some point, I promise.
I
Thank
hope
you for
so.
thank you for taking the time. I know your life's
Absolutely.
very busy, and this has just been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, Scott. It means a lot.
This episode of As Unexpected is sponsored in part by Semester at Sea, a study abroad program where students visit 10 countries on 3 continents, all while taking 3 to 4 college classes through Colorado State University. See course offerings and upcoming voyage itineraries at www.semesteratsea.org. Thank you for joining this week's episode of the As Unexpected podcast. The viewpoints and opinions of featured guests do not necessarily represent those of the Institute for Shipboard Education or Semester at Sea. Hit the like button, share it with your colleagues, family, and friends, and remember, be curious, be compassionate, be courageous. That's what it takes to lead as unexpected.